Live.
And let's hear from it, Nis.
Welcome to Project Sanity. Kind of a special edition in which I'm 6 hours away over in Denmark in the middle of the night, and in which the rest of the team is spread all across the United States. Today we'll be talking about the UK's referendum on the EU, some big news on Volkswagen, where they're going, in which direction they're going with their cars in the international news segment, and we're going to hear a lot about the past week's developments with the Democratic primary, Bernie Sanders, his meeting with Hillary, and other news that have been happening. And in our segment where Dave Coennen, Field of Burn TV, is bringing us even more up-close news about the California primary, we'll be hearing more about the expose that he's been putting together piece by piece about the poll workers and the instructions they've been given, and how people have been given a set of instructions that they've taken with them to the polls, and which has resulted in people not getting the ballots that they were entitled to get. This and more, and in just to keep it all thematic concerning the election, we will be joined by Brandon, also known as a BS Opinion in the YouTube chat, who will be giving us some in-depth knowledge about the Electoral College, the electoral system, how the math works, and how the Green Party, in theory, in the 20-plus states that they are active in, they actually, by just winning those states, could win enough to win the presidency. So more about that in our second hour, and we are hoping, if it doesn't run too late, we're hoping to be able to bring you Bernie Sanders' address to his followers and showing that live on this stream. So without further ado, let me pitch it to Richard, and let's start out the news.
Yeah, thanks, Nis, for joining us all the way out there from Denmark and in the weird time zone. And I know you got a lot on your plate over there. You're going to be back up and working, taking care of things right after the show pretty much. So thank you again for taking the time out and helping us out. And I want to just welcome everybody to Project Sanity as well. And I want to thank Benjamin Dixon channel. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure to subscribe. I just want to thank him again for letting us use this platform, and I will go ahead and get me on screen as soon as I find, there it is. So Nis, thank you again. And on the news from domestically, there's lots of headlines out there. Some of the ones I wanted to cover are some of the ones that maybe getting a little distracted from, I guess. So the first one off the top of the bat I wanted to cover was, many people have probably heard that the Senate passed a defense spending bill. Included within it was women being able to register for the draft, and or being forced, depending on, I guess, how you perceive that, since as a result of being declared capable of filling combat roles, it was, in some people's perspective, the natural conclusion that then they would also register for the draft. Besides that particular portion where Ted Cruz argued against it, it's basically arguing that it seemed unnatural. There were a variety of other aspects of that much larger $600 billion, to give you a better estimate of how big this bill was. About $600 billion in spending was being authorized, and so there were many things within there that were getting fought about. NPR has a decent write-up about it, compiling a lot of information from both Associated Press and some other reports, Washington Post, and you can find the link down in the description beneath the video. It may not be there right now because it was an article I was just able to get together right as before we went live on air, but it'll be there if you're watching this at a recorded time later. Anyway, is within that defense bill that passed about 85-13, according to reports from the AP, that Obama has threatened to veto, but with again a margin of 85-13, that doesn't necessarily matter. That's more than enough to get an override if he does veto it. He said the reasons why he wanted to veto was that it would prevent him from closing Guantanamo Bay, and it looks like that there was also reports to deny its request to shut down surplus bases and limit the size of President's National Security Council, according to the AP. And so beyond that, there were people fighting about what was missing. One of the things that was called for as being missing was an amendment supported by or proposed by Republican Mike Lee out of Utah. And when you hear Republican Mike Lee out of Utah defense spending bill, you're probably wondering what it was that he wanted in there that got shut down. Ironically enough, the provision that he wanted in there was, and that the Senate wouldn't bring to a vote, was basically calling for an amendment that would stop the U.S. federal government from being able to detain U.S. citizens, not immigrants, not people that had traveled recently or anything like that, but just a standard U.S. citizen. You or me could be this person indefinitely. Essentially, he wanted to put an amendment in the defense bill that said that the federal government would not have that authorization, or would explicitly be prevented from being able to do that probably more precisely. You can find the information at his website as far as the details of it. Possibly not out of a traditional venue or spokesperson, but I think it's something that's worth looking into. A while back, there was arguments about using drones to kill U.S. citizens, whether they're in foreign lands, and then whether that could ever be used in the U.S. What we have right now is indefinite federal detention, similar to basically you could theoretically legally be snatched up off the streets and put into Guantanamo Bay. The system might have to eventually account for you or explain why you're there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be charges. And so that's something I think people could look more into. Among other things in the bill were, let's see here, we had one, I know John McCain is in headlines right now for saying that Obama was directly responsible for the Orlando shooting, which we'll talk a little bit more later about. Those comments, I think, are reprehensible, but at the same time, this is the same person that opposed Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday in his state. So I look at his perspective through a contextual lens where I basically just don't listen to him unless it's about military conflicts, and then mostly it's just about how we treat prisoners of war or the humane aspects of war, as far as trying to be as humane as we can. At least sometimes he'll be one of the people on the more hawkish side that says something about, let's not try to harm innocent people. Along those lines, the thing that he got pretty heated about was an amendment to offer more U.S. visas to Afghan interpreters who assisted the U.S. military and during the conflicts in Afghanistan. So essentially people that were on our side interpreting for us in the war, basically filling a combat role, as far as I'm concerned, being on the front lines interpreting between, not to mention interpreting between people that would not necessarily be supportive of their being associated with the United States military. So they put their lives on the line to help us in our effort justly, whether what we were doing was the right thing or not. So I think letting them in is probably the right thing to do. I'm commentating here, so but anyway, that's what McCain argued about. In particular, Kirsten Gillibrand got upset or was frustrated that blocked her effort to pass an amendment reforming the way the U.S. military handles sexual assault cases. So that was regarding whether sexual assault charges went through the chain of command or how they went through, whether they went through independent reviews. And there's a long history of that. Go ahead and look more into that if you're interested, regarding the reporting of rape and sexual abuse in the military and how it gets handled using the chain of command versus independent checks. Other headlines, we have about 5 Sanders Democrats won, according to a report out of theprogressivebrief.com by Adam Hall, in their local primaries. Some of the ones were California's 3rd District's Ron Veresta, a self-described Berniecrat or something along those lines, community organizer, defeated his opponent, Dr. Max Gorin. He was early supporter for Bernie, and he's going to be at the national convention representing him as a delegate. So go ahead and take a look at him if you're in the area, or if you're just interested in helping support or elect more Berniecrats. He's in California's 45th district, taking on Mimi Waters in a heavily red area, though. So I might have missed something there, so I apologize if my note is off. But one of the themes that I noticed through these Berniecrats, and you can go to theprogressivebrief.com to get a full list of who won, who the candidates were, and which districts there are. Several of them are in California, which runs top 2 primaries. So in some of those, they were primarying against a Democratic incumbent, a Republican incumbent, or they were running against one of them. Sorry. Beyond that, the one in particular the theme that they had was that they were running in red districts, the ones that were successful. So they were coming in second against a Republican opponent in a red district, giving some hope that they could possibly come through, but they are usually doing well because the Democratic Party at large has given up on that district, conceding it to Republicans. So one of the interesting ones that came out of that story, I think that's important to draw some attention, is in California's 49th district, which is situated between LA and San Diego on the coast, with Camp Pendleton's Marine base right in the middle of it, is Doug Applegate, who was endorsed by the Vote Progressive California organization, and he's going to be going against Darrell Issa in the general election. They finished neck and neck in the what's in California is a top 2 finisher primary. So Issa won with 51%, but Applegate was right behind him with 45%, with a no-party affiliation candidate pulling in 3. So Darrell Issa, if you're not familiar, he's been involved in a lot of the investigations on Capitol Hill, and has a reputation. So go ahead and look more into Issa if you're interested. It's a race that the progressive candidate that supports Bernie Sanders and would support his agenda at the congressional level could win, and it would be replacing a strongly disliked character from the Republican side, even on the Hill and off the Hill. And so that does it for that report. The next thing I wanted to mention was the People's Summit. At the People's Summit, we have basically, it's going on this weekend in Chicago, and it's going to be bringing together activists committed to different kind of agenda, basically a people's agenda that can enhance and expand issue campaigns and hold all elected officials accountable to popular demands for justice and equality, according to their website. Also on the website, it mentions the summit itself will include workshop sessions devoted to key issues such as Fight for 15, mass incarceration, criminal justice reform, voting rights, expanding democratic participation, a tax on Wall Street speculation to fund human needs and jobs, climate justice towards a sustainable economy, improved Medicare for all, and a fight for free and debt-free higher education and secure retirement. So I think if you're a Bernie supporter, or if you're a progressive and you've been following this channel or this show, then it's probably something you want to keep an eye out for. And you can actually watch it live. They're going to be doing a live stream from their website. You can find that at the People's Summit, and it's .org, and then /live stream to go to the live stream, or just .org if you want to check it out. But they're speaking on those things that I mentioned. Also, I should also mention securing retirement through expanding Social Security, and also ending HIV/AIDS, achieving constitutional pay equity for women, and ending deportation and support for Dreamers, among others, and so many other issues. And some of the guests are going to be Naomi Klein, author, social activist. They're going to have Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman, Hawaii 2nd District, the one that stepped down from the DNC to support Bernie, and I think possibly should be the new DNC chair. Roseanne DeMoro, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, Executive Director of NNU. Sean King's going to be there. Arturo Carmona, who is the National Deputy Political Director for Sanders' 2016 campaign. And there's going to be Kshama Sawant, who is a Seattle City Councilwoman out here in Washington State. And Nita Turner's going to be there, Van Jones, and so many more people to list. tune in all weekend. The schedule's online at thepeoplessummit.org, and you can watch the live stream at peoplesummit.org slash, let's see here, sorry about that, slash live stream. And here we go. And so moving on to the next one. Apologize if we're getting any confusion here. I will get in some messages from the back room, so I'm just trying to sort that out. I'm not sure. It says the split screen's gone, but I think we should be all right. Like, it should be just me on screen, or am I should be watching the stream as well, but I just only have so many windows open. If I can find our link. Nis, if you want to just hop in and talk about some of the news stories we rattled off there while I work on this in the backside.
Okay, so let me just say that the stream is fine. It's just for the purposes of being able to see what's going on outside of watching the YouTube stream. But in any case, to talk about the news, I mean, it's hard for me to even realize that shootings in the United States has become so prevalent and so common that a couple of days after 50 people has been shot, yeah, there's some Facebook pick batches and there's some Twitter pick batches up there, and there's of course a trending topic on Twitter and Facebook, but other than that, it's like, okay, on to do business.
Yeah.
If 50 people died in any sort of whatever in any other country, I should say in most other Western countries, there would be immediate action. There would be emergency powers poured onto whomever was in charge of whatever that could do something about it, and then stuff would be done. And it's amazing to me that people are likening people saying, okay, so people in this country seems to get upset, and when they get upset they try and kill other people, so we should make it more difficult to kill other people, so let's restrict assault rifles. And then people go, oh, but it's not the assault rifle's fault, it's like blaming a drunken driver on the car. No, it's not.
Yeah, I was going to get the last story I had before we got a little off track there was about the the best effort that we were able to mount in our country regarding trying to have a tragedy and make sure that we use that freshness to remind us why it's so important to do something about it and to actually try and do something about it. So what we had was a Democratic filibuster with several participants, and it was about 15 hours long, putting it about ninth in length of filibusters, and it comes, like you said, on the tail of 49 people dying and many others being injured in Orlando, and which I haven't commented on it publicly. It's a tragedy, I should say, and it's truly unfortunate that we've gotten to this point where something like that is happening before we decide that it's time to stand up for 14 hours straight, if that's what it takes to shame or force people into acting on this. There's a lot to unpack with what happened there, though, and we didn't set that time aside. Perhaps next week that'll be a better time. Also, it'll be less fresh, so my condolences to the families if they by any chance happen to stumble across this video, and anybody that was impacted by that tragedy. So that's all I want to say on the tragedy itself. But regarding the filibuster and our best effort, there's an interview with Caroline Frederickson, who's the president of the American Constitution Society for Law and Policy, on Democracy Now! Check that out if you get a chance. It talks a little bit about how there's the perspective that Democrats could be asking for, or people that want sensible gun reform could be asking for more than they're asking, but also kind of a sense of futility among the likelihood of it getting passed. And so with that, that was it for what I had for domestic headlines. So we can check on the audience or take it from there, Nis.
Yeah. My condolences and heart goes out to the families and friends of the people who were murdered and the people who were injured, and to not only have to go through that, but at the same time then watch the commentaries that goes on from far-right Christian churches saying, yeah, that's God's justice and vengeance, to Islamophobes going, yeah, that's because this religion is violent and it's anti-gay people and intolerant, and while at the same time you have a pastor saying that Hurricane Katrina was God's justice against homosexuality in the United States. And so my heart goes out, and I really just try and tune out as much as the BS as you possibly can, and just surround yourself with loved ones, surround yourself with people who support you, not with, and yeah, pay as little attention to the commentators as you possibly can. I'll just, on that note, find my rundown, and yeah, so there's no segue that in any way can provide respect or context, respect to the brief of the Orlando shooting. So I apologize for us not having more time at this juncture in it. I'll see if we can put in more time to talk about that horrendous action. But for now, we will bring in Dave, who is doing his recurring segment on the California primary. And you would think that after the California primary was over, that it would actually, we would be done with this recurring segment, but it seems like there's quite a lot still left to report on. So,
what do you think this is, Nis? Germany?
I'm working on getting you up here, Dave. Give me a moment visually.
No problem. It's all good. Well, we were talking last week about how Germany is able to get 70% turnout. Their results are pretty much done the night of the election, except for certification, and they have a pretty complicated system too. So it's doable, that's for sure.
And we're talking here about a nation divided into several member states, just like the United States. It's Germany is a federation of states of the former German baronies.
And it's not a two-party system either. There are multiple parties that you're voting for in order to build up coalitions. That's correctness? Am I not mistaken?
Yes, they have local parliaments, and then they have the federal parliament. And yes, you have a multitude of local parties, and a lot of those are also represented in the national parliament. And they build coalitions in which they have X number of seats, and then those parties, they band together and say, okay, together, we three parties, we have a majority, we are going to form a government together, and this guy's going to be our prime minister, chancellor, is what it's called in Germany. And that's the way that they do it. Like, usually, the biggest party in one of these coalitions runs with their party chair as the person who you then assume is going to be the prime minister. So, yeah, that's how they do it.
Well, they get it done. We're not done here yet. And part of what's being talked about is of course, Benjamin has discussed, and we've discussed it here, the AP calling the election on Monday night basically suppressed the vote in another Super Tuesday on Tuesday. And not only did it affect voters, it affected poll workers as well. One of the things I'm gonna tell you about today is that the Board of Supervisors in LA County, they had a hearing on Tuesday as well this week, where they received lots of testimony from poll inspectors, poll workers, and just citizens concerned about their vote. about their experience in the on the 7th, and it's not really encouraging. There are definitely issues with, I think, in one of the interviews that I have a clip from with Dean Logan, who is the Register Recorder of LA County. He talks about how basically the machines that we use in LA County are from 1968 that have been retrofitted and updated, and some of that isn't even, and the counting stuff downtown is just old school. But I went down on Tuesday. That's what I did. I went down to the Register Recorder, County Clerk. They were going to do a run in LA County. They reporting the unprocessed ballot count every Tuesday and Friday are the official reports. Now Tuesday was updated, and you can find all these reports if you go to lavote.net. You can find out not only the national numbers but also all the county numbers. And basically the latest from the Secretary of State, I can tell you from this morning, the Secretary of State website continues to update their unprocessed ballot totals. And just 3 days ago, it was 2.3 million. And as of today, it is down to total across the state of 1.3 million unprocessed ballots in California. In Los Angeles, 368,000 remaining of those 259,000 provisionals. Now, provisionals were given out like candy on the 7th. If you look at the overall numbers, it seems to be about the same as they've had throughout the last few elections. There were actually larger number of provisional ballots in the general election in 2012 in California because we had just started online registration. So that was an increase because the more people you have registering, the more confusion there is and the first-time voter problems. So there's a degree of voter responsibility that needs to be taken. And there were, not to say that there weren't problems. The testimony at the Board of Supervisors and Dean Logan, if you go to his Twitter account, he's very good about keeping his account updated and letting everybody know the unprocessed ballot count, how many ballots were done within the reporting period. And there's a great link on his Twitter account to this breakdown from the Board of Supervisors. But there were some very similar complaints from the precinct captains, and one of the complaints was that the poll workers, the precinct captains, seemed to be trained to give, not to offer crossover ballots to NPP voters. In fact, they were telling some precinct managers, is like, no, we're not supposed to offer that at all. Well, I came across some information not only from LA County, which I have a little video, 2-minute video put together about how the LA County Register Recorder and the county clerk, they did their training for the poll workers that every precinct inspector must take, but poll workers in LA County, it was voluntary if they wanted to take the training. In fact, they got an extra $25 if they went down and did the training. And you made $100 if you were a poll worker. I think it was $175 for a precinct captain or a supervisor type role. But they're the ones who only got the real extensive training. And the poll workers, even though they're paid and they technically signed up, a lot of them did not show up. And the general feeling was that had a lot to do with the AP report, and that people just didn't bother going out to work at the polls. And so a lot of poll workers, the only person there was the one person. Now, the way it works, if part of this video, I don't know if Richard can cue it up, maybe we'll go to that. But part of this video, you'll see the content from the Register Recorder. If you go to their YouTube site, you can watch this 22-minute training video. And I've just got clips from it for the NPP section and the crossover, what they're being told to do, what they should have been told to do. And then there's a little video that they did, a clip of a PSA of how they were trying to get that information out, and a little bit from Dean Logan on the training of his poll workers. And that interview is from a chap by the name of Shoot First Inc. on YouTube, and I just borrowed 30 seconds from that, but that's a really good long interview of Dean Logan. So Richard, if you've got that video, maybe we can go to that, and I'll get my notes together on some other.
Yeah, so I have the LA poll worker video. Is that the one that we're?
That's the one.
Okay, yes. And I also got those images ready if you wanted to show those and talk about
Oh,
them
great. We'll
after the
talk
video.
about those on the back end.
All right. And
Great.
so here we go.
So if you've received a no party preference ballot in the mail and you want to cross over for one of those parties, you can still do that. You can contact us, make a new request, and declare which party you want. Or you can go to your polling place on election day, surrender that vote by mail ballot, and cross over. If you're a poll voter on election day, when you go in to sign that roster, the poll workers are instructed, when they see that you're a no party preference voter, to go over the choices with you and allow you to make the choice of which ballot you want.
In presidential primary elections, voters may only vote for the presidential and political party county central committee candidates in the party they are registered in. In this election, the American Independent, Democratic, and Libertarian parties have chosen to allow nonpartisan voters to cross over to their party. The roster clerk will ask every nonpartisan voter if they wish to vote for the presidential candidate in the American Independent, Democratic, or Libertarian Party, and if they do, line out NPP and write in the party they have chosen to cross over to.
The roster clerk locates the voter's name and address on the roster page or on the supplemental list attached to the back cover, checks the status of the voter, and announces the voter's party to the ballot clerk. If the voter is nonpartisan, ask if they would like to cross over to either the American Independent, Democratic, or Libertarian Party.
And I think that was the meat of what you were after there, Dave. Sorry, the way we have it set up, I can't have you and the video on screen at the same time due to the current configuration.
No problem, no problem. Well, that little clip just continues. That's a little PSA they created that they put out about a month before the election on crossover ballots and NPP voting, and there's no dialogue to it at all. It's just voiceover and images. So that doesn't always click with people. And there's another PSA that election official created that went up, I think, a week before. The YouTube channel from the Register Recorders, the training video is just watched, rather the original crossover video. That part of that is in there was watched, I think, maybe 3,000 times. So that is the training that the LA County poll workers and precinct inspectors are supposed to be getting from LA County. And as far as Dean Logan knows, that's what they're getting. And if we could bring up that first image of the LA County elections manual, I found it online, and that's it's the head page there. It's from LA County, and then it's the 2 pages that show exactly how the poll worker is supposed to deal with people who are NPP. There's a nice little flow chart, and there's a very detailed explanation that you are supposed to offer immediately. If it's an NPP voter, do you want a crossover ballot for one of the 3 parties? And they name the 3 parties, and the voter that can then say no, or they can say yes, I would like a Democratic crossover ballot, or whatever it is. And then, of course, they follow the procedures you saw in the video, where the roster worker would write down the correct party they want, and then, ballot worker, we need a Democratic crossover ballot for this person. They're like, okay. And then there's supposed to be basically 5 or 6 people doing the work in these polling places, 4,700 of them in Los Angeles. Voter turnout, record for LA County, traditionally low, about 42% in LA County, which is good for us. Now the state looks like it was pretty high. It was closer to 51%, which is pretty decent, not quite as good as 2008. But it looks like the training that the LA County workers were supposed to be getting was adequate. It's what they were supposed to be telling voters. Now, we are the largest county in the United States, largest voting block in the United States, LA County. So it's a challenge. There were many, many challenges on the day, and you can read the testimony of over 60 people that submitted it. You can probably watch. There were a number of people streaming it on Facebook from the Board of Supervisors. You can catch the testimony, but basically what it came down to is insufficient staff, scan machines that, lo and behold, don't actually count votes, but making sure your ballot it reads, that's all they were there for. The ballots are actually counted during the official canvass that night, and then for the next 30 days down at the register recorders in whatever county you're in. So that isn't actually counting your ballot anyway. But one of the things that came up is that if you only voted for one thing, it wouldn't read it. So you're like, oh, it's not taking my ballot, it's not taking my vote. Well, that would end up in a certain spot down in the county. And there's 5 different areas where there are folks literally looking at every ballot, opening every mail-in envelope. Every provisional ballot in the state of California is counted. It has nothing to do with whether it's a close race or not. If it made it from the polling places, qualification, to the county, I felt reasonably secure that you have some conscientious people down there, lots of them, in all different areas, trying to make sure that your vote is getting cast in LA County. Some of there's a remake section where they remake ballots that are unreadable by the machine. Some are stapled, some are torn, some are chewed up by the dog, they use a red pen, doesn't work, they have to redo it. Some of them look like a 4-year-old was handed the ballot. There's just scribbles all over it, big circle. It's crazy. Some of the actual ballots that she showed me that people expect their vote to be counted. Someone wrote out her name, address, the date, I'm voting in this election, I want to vote for this person, but there was no ballot. It was a sample ballot, but that's it. Well, the intent of the voter is there. So the person working in the county looks at that and say, okay, well, they want to vote for that person, so they made a ballot for her choice in that particular race, whatever it was, and put it through. Now, these ballots that are remade, and everything down in the county of Los Angeles anyway, everything is held for a paper recount if needed. They ended machine electronic voting after 2000. So now it's not a punch card, rather it is scanned. It's not a punch card. They got rid of the Chad, is what I mean. So there's a long way to go in LA County. Let's just take a look at, if we can, let's bring up the inconsistency of the training. So we noticed even in LA County, some of these workers were getting information that they were not supposed to offer crossover ballots. Well, I found that based on some independent websites that were tracking some things and getting some information from poll workers, that indeed there are counties in California that are telling their poll workers to not offer crossover ballots. And one of them is Santa Clara, up there in Silicon Valley. And page 49 of the election manual says very succinctly, do not offer crossover ballots to non-NPP voters. So there is definitely misinformation in California at the different precincts. There's 58 different counties. LA County had 4,700 precincts. The ballot boxes are actually open. I would suggest going to their site and watching that training video to see exactly how your vote, how your vote made it from your polling place, hopefully, to the register recorder. It's about 22 minutes. It's a very interesting watch. So the voting continues. Bernie caught up about 2 points. He's 11%, give or take, behind now. When on election night it was 13%. There's, as I say, 1.3 million votes left to be counted, and we expect the next report, at least from LA County, this Friday, tomorrow. Very important date tomorrow, guys, actually, I wanted to mention before we go, is that tomorrow is the last day for anyone. It's a new law in the state of California that if you didn't sign your ballot, they actually send an affidavit back to you and say, hey, you didn't sign your ballot, we need you to send this in. So tomorrow is actually the deadline to send those back. So if you received one of those, and apparently there's a lot of them, that vote will still be counted as long as it's postmarked by tomorrow. So if you received one of those, didn't sign your ballot accidentally, a lot of voter error, guys. I really think a lot of this is, you have to be diligent. People open their ballots the day they go to vote, and they're like, wow, this is the wrong ballot. And they admit, we make mistakes. There are mistakes, but they were there to help you. Now, they were understaffed on the day. We personally were escorted out of a polling place very belligerent people at the poll worker level, right? It really seems to be there. The bureaucrats out down there in the county, they were awesome. They were great, very helpful, gave lots of really good information. And anybody can go down there until this is done and watch the process. You can walk right in, sign up down there in Norwalk in LA County. One thing I can report also of what they're looking to do in the future, and we don't know how soon this is going to happen. And we can talk about the new motor voter law, which doesn't go into effect actually until next July. Thank you very much. That's going to get a lot more people registered, but not necessarily out to vote. And one of the things they're talking about doing in LA County is creating, instead of individual polling places where all this chaos, literal chaos just occurred all over, is that they will be voting centers. Say, once they formulate it out, Dean suggested maybe, say, 10 days before the vote, there'd be 400 of them open throughout the county. And then there'd be more opened as it got closer, and you could go anytime, that they're open 10 days before and go in and vote. All the information would be there. You wouldn't have to go to a specific polling place and look at your name on a thing. All the information would be there and streamlined. And then we would have, at that point, they're hoping to have same-day registration, which would eliminate any problems of wrong party. Parties were switched. Any number of things that you could possibly think of could happen, looks like might have happened on the day. A lot of it had to do with lack of staffing. I'm sure that's why a lot of provisional ballots went out, is because people were just overwhelmed and they just couldn't get to the information fast enough for people. Machines didn't start. People needed codes. So there was definitely a lack of information that could have been better. But I got to say, LA County, I think, for the size and the amount of voters, 5 million registered voters in LA County, they're trying really hard. I think the training could get better for sure.
Yeah,
and we're going to keep a watch.
I was just going to say, Dave, that was some really excellent reporting out of California, and it's really important, I think, for people to realize how that breaks down at the county level, and how there was also additional issues that you mentioned a little bit about at the precinct level before it ever got there, but at LA County, that there's some really hardworking people that take the integrity of the election system seriously and are working really hard and being very diligent and making sure that every vote gets counted. And I think that's an important detail, so that they don't feel like they're getting thrown under the bus with everybody else that's getting charges lobbed at them as far as what they did or didn't do appropriately regarding their expectations. And so I think that was some great stuff, and getting us in here to talk about it also.
Sure. Yeah, they're just to sort of tie up a little bit. I really suggest if you can go down to your county wherever they're counting the ballots. And there's still a lot of unprocessed ballots in every county. It needs to be. They have 30 days in the state of California to give the final report, and not every county is updating regularly like LA County. Some are, some not. The California Secretary of State updates their numbers every few days when they get updates from other counties. But July 1st, July 5th, that area is when the counties are turning in their final numbers. July 8th will be the certified. So we're going to keep watching it and see if the county, if the state can split. 3 counties have flipped for Bernie in this process. So we don't know if there's going to be enough, but Nis, hey man.
Well, all this about having different ballots and all of these things, it must be because in Europe we're low information voters or something. Like we can't keep track of that many different ballots. We just when we turn 18, whenever it's an election year, we get a piece of paper in the mail, a piece of cardboard paper, and very sturdy. And you take this piece of cardboard paper, you put it in your inner pocket where it fits nicely, and then you walk down to your polling place that's open from 6 in the morning till like 10 in the evening, and then you hand it to an election poll worker, and that poll worker crosses you off a list and gives you the ballot that you need to vote on, and that ballot has every candidate, every political party, and if there's something on the agenda, say a referendum on the EU or whatever, then you also get that as a separate one. Then you go into a voting booth, you take a pen, and then you cross the party or the person, and then you go out and then you put it in a box, and then it gets counted by people who are representing all of the parties. They are all in the same room, standing shoulder to shoulder, counting the ballots, and it gets done within a couple of hours for each polling place. And I don't know, maybe it's because we lack the capability to process complicated systems like a two-party system with like, how many ballots do you have?
No, every county, yeah, that's, I mean, just to go on, what you've been talking about, every county has a different ballot. They all look different, so there's no uniformity there. Now this year it's new that the state of California has, I think, done a marvelous thing in making basically it's a sort of runoff. It's the top two. It's called top two. For instance, in the Senate race, the top two vote getters are both Democrats, Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez. So those two Democrats will be on the ballot for senator in November. Nobody else. There will be no Republican on the ballot in California for senator from California to replace Barbara Boxer. So that's because the rest of the state has adopted this top two system. Now the presidential primary is completely different because the parties are involved. Your Republicans, your Greens, and Peace and Freedom are closed. Nobody could cross over. I saw ballots that were Dem or NPP. They went, hey, I want to vote in the Republican. They're like, you can do a provisional, but when they look at it, they're going to see you were an NPP, even though you were Republican for years. Somehow you ended up being NPP, and you can't vote in the Republican primary. So the parties really added another layer of complexity. You had to request the crossover ballot in advance, which might have been part of why the misinformation came down. It's like, oh, even at the polling place, they have to request it. We can't offer it. Because initially you got a postcard that said, would you like to request, if you're a mail-in ballot, mail-in voter, which is a category, you need to request a mail-in crossover ballot from one of these parties. Now, a lot of people didn't realize, especially new voters, that if they were vote by mail, which is one of the issues that came up, was that all of a sudden people are like, vote by mail? I've never been vote by mail. I didn't check that. Or I am vote by mail and I never got my ballot. There were issues with getting the registers out. The supplementals didn't make it to UCLA. So all of the new kids that registered in that district weren't on the list. So they had to vote provisionally. Now, if they made it to the county, which is questionable, apparently one of the issues is the ballots, certain types of ballots were locked up, and the provisionals and the mail-ins were just in an envelope and they weren't secure. So that was one of the topics that came up. So, that trail, I think centralizing it, which is the idea, and then, of course, same-day registration, is going to make the process less chaotic. I mean, there's areas in California where they literally fly the ballots in that night by helicopter to the collection point. And this is all every box, every box.
Why don't they just count the ballots where they were cast? Why don't they just have the people there upend the baskets where the ballots are in and then count them by hand?
And do it there.
They take up this thing called a telephone. They pick it up off the hook or they flap it open, depending on how old technology they're using. Right. And then they tell people, yeah, this many people voted for that.
Well, everybody had a cell phone. Every inspector had a cell phone at their location. They often couldn't get a hold of their people. There was arguing. There was lots of tension at these polling places. Severely understaffed. They just didn't have the manpower or the resource to get information. Now, everyone down at the county is a county employee doing counting. The people at the polling stations, even though they're technically making a stipend, they're volunteers. They get minimal training, and they're just basically schleps off the street. It's like jury duty. I mean, there was one person that reported that, oh yeah, I've done this for 10 years. I have no idea what a street index does. We just don't do that.
Okay, so to round it off, Abiya's opinion, Brandon, who we will be talking to in the second hour, he commented on the YouTube that it's just such a complicated system with so many moving parts. Can't we just do a Hunger Games type scenario with the top 8 candidates?
I'm down.
Then Marcus Plenty says that he actually think it would guarantee much younger candidates running, and we would probably be more efficient at finding good presidents than what we have right now.
You know, you throw some swords and bows and arrows, and what we got, it's almost Hunger Games. So, you know, it's everybody's got a gun. That's what the one of them wants. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next comment is from Lakeisha Rankin, who's commenting something I actually didn't think about when I was being quite, dickish about what I said about how you count your ballots. That it's so important to count them in place, and that the United States used to do this. Chain of custody, major issue.
Yes.
And I would actually completely agree with you on that, Lakeisha. Thank you for pointing that out.
And that is, if you do watch that video, if you're interested in 22 minutes of your life to see how your vote moved from place to place in LA County, that is a big part of it. The precinct inspector is supposed to go with a poll worker in the same car with all of the ballots and the supplies, go back to the collection center in their county, get in line, and wait in their car until a county voter worker comes up and takes the supplies and the ballots out of their car. So there is a certain degree of chain of custody that they try to keep in this. And I think that's what they're thinking about with these voting centers, is that will be less of a problem. You won't hopefully end up with provisionals in the dumpsters. I haven't seen any videos of that yet. I've seen some pretty shoddy handling videos of, down at the precinct level. But some of these places where they do polling, it's just ridiculous. The voting where you vote, it's just crazy. So I think, but it really is voter beware. A lot of this comes down to it is your vote. You have a right and responsibility. You have rights, but you also have a responsibility to make sure your vote gets counted. And if you can the county will help you. Now you could only vote at one spot in Norwalk in LA County. Then they created this year, near the end, these will call spots, which is sort of like the idea of a center. So there were will call places where you could go in the last couple of weeks to get your ballot and do it. So they're making moves in the right direction. I can't even talk to you about electronic ends of it. The stuff at the polling places, those machines don't actually count ballots. It's the machine in the county where you can't get in the room, in that room. It's almost like an execution. They have permanent benches and windows, so a lot of people must go down there and watch this stuff. Because you can sit there, and there's a lot of campaigns down there. There were some Republicans down there watching tight races, and you can sit there and watch all the action behind the glass. Then they'll take you to where the 1%, they do a random drawing of 1% of all the votes in LA County, and I'm sure they do this statewide, it's a state law, where they sit there, and there's 3 people at every table. And they literally, it's like counting Chads without the Chads. They go through the ballot, they go through everything and make sure that it's the same, that it should be, and they literally hand count 1% randomly of all of the precincts within the county. So there's a provisional section, there's a vote by mail section, there's the ballot remake section. There are literally lots of ins and outs and moving parts that you'd think there'd be easier ways to do it, but when you're working off this 1968 voting machine where all they did was retrofit it so you could make a dot instead of a punch. They just basically, they did a MacGyver on their voting machines they send out. So instead of a punch thing, it's a marker that makes a bingo mark. So that's the latest update. But
yeah, thank you for that. And if you're just joining us, you are watching Project Sanity, and you've just been hearing Dave Coennen from Field of Burn TV do an update report on the California primary. You can go to his channel on YouTube, Field of Burn TV Live, and to watch more of the packages that he's put together, or you can find his great work here on the Project Sanity. I am, of course, Nis Pedersen, the one half of Project Sanity. With me today is Richard Parker, my better half, who's basically running everything as an octopus. And we will be having Brandon also known as a BS Opinion, join us and explain to us the Electoral College system here in the second hour. And we are hoping, if Bernie is on time at 8:30, to bring his address to all of his followers and the movement today. Now, there's a lot of speculation in the media about, now he's going to bow out. Now he's going to drop out. Now he's going to go and say, oh, Hillary's so amazing and we got to defeat Trump. But I think they're going to be very, very, very disappointed. Without further ado, Richard, can you please tell us what your impression of the last week of Bernie meeting this person, Bernie meeting that person, Bernie doing a statement here, Bernie doing a statement there. What is your impression of what's been going on the last week?
For me, it looks like Bernie's trying to figure out how much leverage he has, what's the effective ask, and how much bend is there both in Hillary and how much support is there behind him in the electorate for various ideas. I think one of the big ones he's pushing right now is replacing Debbie Wasserman Schultz out of the DNC chair. How significant of an ask that is, I think, depends on several things. As far as who would be a good role there, I know before in some of our previous meetings we had discussed, is that something Bernie would want? I don't know. I think Tulsi Gabbard would actually be a pretty good example, as that she stepped down from there to support Bernie as a result of basically feeling, in part at least, that the DNC had already made their choice, which we're going to be, depending on if Bernie comes on at 5:30 or not, we may be running short. So I know some people in chat mentioned Guccifer 2.0, and there's some questions about where that hack is, originated from. There's a pretty good write-up on, I want to say it was a Motherboard, I believe, or something. I think there was a link earlier that I saw in our progressive chat room, and it mentioned basically that there's a lot of signs pointing towards it being Russian hacking or intelligence agencies. And so I think with that, the DNC, in light of those and with what's going on with that, and it looks like essentially that they were basically had already decided a month into the race that they were going to be nominating Hillary Clinton, if we're to believe that those documents are true and verifiable. And so with that in mind, I think Bernie's already gotten that impression from his back channels, and I think that's where some of the anger and stuff comes from on that. And so that's roughly where I think he's looking at for the week. I don't know where this ends up. I think he's going to the convention. I don't know what he's going to say tonight. I'm terribly curious.
I mean, on the Guccifer thing, I gotta say, like, I'm waiting for WikiLeaks to start releasing, because even though they're not a traditional news organization, they do care about vetting. So when they release what they release, I'll take a look at it and I'll try and see it into context. And of course, if there are people who want to help us grind through the enormous amount of data that they're talking about releasing, you're more than welcome to. But until they're released through an organization that actually has the manpower to confirm and verify the originality and sourcing of these kind of sources, I'm not going to comment on it too much. I mean, one thing I will say is that even if for example, what Richard just described is true, that Hillary had been sending mails to the DNC that were confirmed that they wanted her as their nominee and no one else, even if that was true, that is not breaking a law, because it's primary.
Yeah, two things. Yeah, it's not breaking a law, but it is important to note that the DNC hasn't denied that those emails are real, or that any of the documents in there aren't true. So
now, how could it be that a democratic organization would be careful about not confirming or denying something concerning emails? Now, what on earth could make them cautious concerning this? I cannot imagine.
Yes, but I think one of the things that it does do is it basically makes getting rid of Debbie Wasserman Schultz at least a slam dunk, in that she was out saying that she was an impartial person. Either one of these people could win, and either one would be, when really they were already making plans, if this is to be believed, and as I mentioned, hasn't been denied by the DNC, that they had
So
already
Rochelle is asking,
Go.
which of all of these scandals surrounding the DNC and surrounding Hillary could take down Hillary, because in her lifetime this is the worst candidate ever. But I'm afraid I have a very depressing answer for you. None. Bernie isn't saying the system is rigged for funsies. I mean, he isn't going out there going, oh, the system is rigged, you should vote for me, come on, let's have a gay old time. Bernie's out there saying, the system is rigged, the oligarchs are in control, the money is in control, you don't have any, so you don't get any. So that is how it's fixed. And you actually have Republican senators, and we're not talking about the people who are basically walking shoe bumps, who are holding hearing after hearing after hearing on Hillary Clinton. We're talking about Republican senators and representatives who have long-lasting ties and relationships on the Hill, including within the FBI, who are talking about the FBI being held on a very tight leash, simply wanting to run rampant with this investigation, but the Department of Justice simply won't engage. So even if these reports are exaggerated for political gain and political play in an election season, now who could imagine that? Even if that is so, you cannot in any way underestimate the influence and power of the Clintons within the Democratic Party itself. And for the leader of the Department of Justice to indict Hillary Clinton and then she might win anyway, I mean, you'd be done. Like, that would be it. The Clintons reportedly, from various numbers of sources over many years, have lists of people who's helped them and lists of people who's been against them. And I guarantee you, Nina Turner, she was on the one list, and then she endorsed Bernie. She ain't on that list no more. Like, Nina Turner, unless Bernie really body slam shields her, she's done in the Democratic Party. Like, I mean, unless she can somehow prove herself more valuable to the Clintons, so that they can use her as an example of how you can reform yourselves in the Clintons, in the eyes of the Clintons, she ain't going nowhere in the Democratic Party after this election.
I suppose it depends on which, it depends on which Democratic Party moves on after this election, and what progressives and reasonable people that aren't really strongly affiliated with any party decide to do moving forward after what this election appears to be. Lesser of two evils doesn't really, I don't think, do it justice in just how bad of a choice that we're looking at. Like, somebody mentioned it's not a choice, it's a threat, I think is one of the memes or whatever that goes around. That feels more appropriate in that either candidate feels like it's a threat to segments of society, either like domestically and internationally. And so that, to me, is not the kind of choice that I'm looking forward to or willing to make. And like, there are other options, and they can call that vote whatever they want to call it, but I'm not going to be voting for either one of those two leading candidates, if you want to call them that. And that's my personal perspective. And so, like, I don't know how that's going to pan out, and I think we're going to talk more about that in the future. But yeah, it's a tough cookie, or it's a tough thing to deal with, in my opinion, as far as moving forward in the Democratic Party at large.
Yeah. One of the first friends I made in North Carolina, we've really been going back and forth on this Bernie Hillary thing, like, and they got to a point where it was just, okay, so, I mean, Trump might actually allow people to wear white sheets out in the open again, and make it very dangerous for minorities like that. But Hillary's going to send our sons to war and continue the extremely insidious system. the new Jim Crow, and continue that. And like, okay, so organizations like the KKK, they can actually be banned, but a way of thinking, a way of simply doing things without thinking about it, like what Michelle Alexander describes the new Jim Crow partly being, like it's also very much intentional, but a part of it, a big part of it, is also this it's just how we do, it's how we view, it's how things are done. I mean, you can't outlaw that. You'd have to tear down the entire justice system, basically, state by state, and then federally, and then rebuild it from scratch to be able to actually undo the new Jim Crow. Like, either that or you would have to do marginal change.
Yeah, I mean, call me a supporter of radical overhaul and whatever it takes. Like, I mean, if you can only do certain segments at a time, that's how you got to do it. But I'm not opposed to completely like firing everybody from situations and then just hiring back people after you've cleaned them out and you've had another city come in and temporarily replace those people, like, and just move and hop from town to town that way, so that it's entirely cleaned out, and everybody that gets rehired will have to be vetted under the new, more like realistic and more comprehensive background checks and looking into who these people are, looking into their previous reports, if it's a police officer, if they've had previous actions in courtrooms by judges, if they're a lawyer, or whatever it may be that applies to their particular aspect. That if they've been alleged to have caused problems, that those things are thoroughly investigated independently. Again, not just taking a look at the what the police said about themselves. So, and if that's what it's going to take, I'll support it.
If we at the same time could separate the execution of justice and the creation of justice, like a form of branches of government, if like you could like envision government being different branches, and then you like separated them from each other, that would also be great, because right now they ain't.
Yeah, and Brandon is mentioning in chat, and I think he's going to be joining us shortly, since Bernie's scheduled to come on in about 19 minutes, give or take.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to get Brandon in here shortly, but he mentioned that it's important that we have to tackle it from the personal and cultural level to change the individual evaluation of people of color within the United States, and talk basically, and this is a conversation that we've been having back and forth as well, offline or off air, is regarding that we can't just look at the institutions, but we have to look at how these institutions reflect our social will. And I think he'll come back and go into more depth about that.
Yeah. Okay, so without further ado, let's bring in Brandon, who has been crunching some numbers and looking at some history and putting it into a sociological and historical context about the Electoral College. Brandon, welcome back to Project Sanity, and thank you for joining us.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. I'm always glad to, join you guys and, just spread the sanity.
That's wonderful.
Okay, so Brandon, why don't you just dive into it? Let's start by hearing what is the Electoral College.
Well, I think before we even get into the just minutia of it, it's really important to understand why we don't talk about it more often and what it was intended for in the beginning. And I think the reason it sort of gets ignored through the larger parts of our presidential election season is because it is so out of continuity, to say, with what we consider to be democracy. It was originally intended as not to facilitate democracy between, in the presidential election, but to safeguard against it. Like, this was the founding fathers' attempt to separate out powers and reduce the populace's say on the presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
So, just some basic numbers. I'm sure most people know this, but the Electoral College is a temporary body established around 6 months before, to a year before the presidential election. It's composed of 538 people, electors, each representing that number is representative of the number of people in the House and number of people in the Senate combined. So each state, as electors, gets the same number as they get in the House plus 2 for the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
It's been around since since the first election, but
Now, these electoral votes, how many electoral points or whatever you want to call them, that each state is based on. That is based on the census, right?
yes, that's based on the population of the state as determined by the census. So the way that math works out is that on average, each state gets 1 delegate per 550 people within that state, plus 2 for your senators. And
Mm-hmm.
that leads to the first problem because some states have only about 550 people in them. So, say the state of Wyoming, which has a population of roughly only 550,000 people, and so they are overrepresented within the Electoral College. So, for each elector they have, they are representing theoretically only 170,000 people. So their votes are worth 3 times as much as someone from a more populous state.
Mm-hmm. Now, the census, this is, of course, carried out by a nonpartisan, completely neutral, non-governmental organization, correct?
Yes, as far as that is a possibility, it is completely non-biased and partisan. Nonpartisan.
But it's actually the U.S. Census Bureau, correct?
Yes, and
Which
it's done
is
every 10 years.
a government bureau, which is actually a federal bureau.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so they of course use the newest technology in how to calculate. They just go to the DMV and then they take all those names there and then they start with that and then they go out and find all the other people by some super detector, spy satellite, NSA type stuff. That's how they go about finding out how many people actually live in each state, right?
Well, I mean, this is America, so in case you didn't, we're all tagged like dogs now. So they just turn on our tags, and what they tell us is that they send out the little cards and we check the boxes, but really we're just all tagged. You know, if you feel in the crux of your elbow right here, you can feel a little chip that they put in you as a baby.
Yo.
But no, I mean it's as accurate as it can be. There's no reason to lie. It's pretty accurate. It's done every 10 years as you mentioned, through a variety of mechanisms: self-reporting, census takers, DMV records, birth records, all of those things, all good stuff. You know.
They've recently started to expand categories and be more inclusive as far as what kind of information that they're trying to collect and like not try to force people into much more generic boxes. But I mean, it still has a lot of work to do. But
yeah, so in terms, there's probably nothing that insidious going on at the Census Bureau besides the fact that they still use the term Negro as opposed to an African American.
You're kidding me. Okay. So, but yeah. So the U.S. Census Bureau carries out, and then they carry out a census, and we assume that they are doing it in as unpartisan a way as they can, and with the tools that they are allowed, they do it as well as they are able to. Now, of course, inner city homeless people and stuff like that is going to be very hard to count because you count it by hand. A guy basically walking around with a spreadsheet. But they do as good a job as they can with what they have, and then we get the how many electoral points that each state gets. Okay, so walk us through. We go out and we vote for a president. What happens?
Well, so I'm in New York City, you're in South Carolina. We go down to our voting location. We wait an hour for 5+ hours to cast a vote, to check a box. That vote gets tallied with all the other votes in every other district, and it gets grouped up into one big pile of votes that are representative of all voters in the state. Once those votes are counted, whoever wins the plurality of votes in the state, so whoever gets the most votes, even if whatever candidate gets the most votes, even if it's by one vote, gets the entirety of the electoral votes of the state. That's what happens. That's called the winner-take-all system, and it was established in 1824. So before that, they used to do it by district. So if you win the district, you would get the votes from that
Okay,
district.
so if a state goes 51-49, then the 49% they just don't get a voice in that election.
Well, no. Technically, that wouldn't be so bad. But so what makes this even more egregious is that their voice gets co-opted by the 51%. So the 51% gets domination over the 49% in that case. So as opposed to their votes just not, as opposed to them just not having any power, they are still counted towards the Electoral College in that census. So the 51% basically just gets domination of the 49% in terms of national power.
Okay.
But in the same situation, if we had a three-party race and someone got 39%, and they would just get the domination of the other 61% as it was laid out in that way.
Okay, so now we voted, and the electoral votes, they then automatically just goes to that candidate, right?
More or less, that's just all the votes go to the candidate that gets the plurality of votes, and at the national level.
Okay, so there's no process beyond that. There are no delegates. There are nothing that gets.
Well, okay, so the delegates are symbolic of the electoral votes. The party they're elected, as we know, we've had Adair on the show. He's the national delegate from Washington. They go to they cast their symbolic votes, and in theory, they cast those votes as representative of whoever won the popular vote of the state. And I say in theory because there is nothing compelling them to actually do that. So 29 states so we all have electors, but only 29 states actually have laws or pledges on the books that require the electors to actually vote for whatever person wins the popular vote. Uh, Within those 29 states that do have laws, the penalty for breaking that law is anywhere from a misdemeanor to $1,000 fine. So in Washington State, if you choose to be a faithless elector, which means you either don't cast a vote at all, or you vote for the wrong person, or whatever person you want, you get charged a $1,000 fine. So the equivalent of like littering or driving 90 and 65.
Okay.
Or about 1/4 of what it costs to get to Philadelphia for the DNC convention if you're a delegate.
Yeah, so stay home and vote for Joe Stein.
Okay, so when we vote for a president, we're not talking about the primary. We're talking about the general election here, correct?
Yes. In the primary.
So when we vote for a president, when we're covered by the election laws, the federal protection, and it would be election fraud to do anything about it and to try and fake the election or anything, what actually happens isn't that you vote for a president. You vote for a bunch of people to go represent someone.
Yes, you basically vote for your electors and what they're going to vote for. And I guess the most insidious part of this is not the actual structure itself, but how it makes people feel about voting in general, and how deeply the winner-take-all system changes the metric for how candidates behave and how voters behave and do not behave.
It looks like we're getting just a little audio issues there, so I don't know if something might have started eating up some bandwidth from your side or something. Take a look into that. It might help resolve the audio issues. But I think it's an interesting point that you bring up there, Nis, about we think that you cast your vote for president and then the president wins, but there's these layers in between when you cast your vote and who actually gets elected. And we've realized, well, the primary is one step of that process. Then we get delegates, and we send those delegates to pick a nominee. And we realize how that process has been manipulated. We've done that pretty thoroughly, looked into that regarding that aspect, and we may get some chances to talk with the DARE next week after we come back from our state convention. And we when we get to these electors, and then we find out, wait a minute, not even they are actually really that bound to do what we're asking them or telling them to do, and like you mentioned, it seems like that leaves room for corruption. But when you look at it in the context, as you pointed out, that it wasn't really intended to be overly democratic, as it started to shift anyway, that I'm sorry, I lost my train, but at the same point, I just wanted to mention also that we should really look into doing that, breaking it down by the district level or another level at the electoral level. But on that note, I will go back to you guys. Hopefully Brandon's audio was able to get cleared up.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we've been hearing you fine. It's just there's some scratching, some cutouts on the mic.
It might sounds like it might be it's not getting the delay quite right with between Google Hangouts, and so it's getting a little echo. That may be the issue.
Okay, so Brandon, try jumping out the Hangout and rejoining us, and then we simply try again. And now there we go. So so we'll be joined by Brandon again in just a minute. Now, this electoral system, we talk about democracies. Now, for example, the primary, voting in the primary is a relatively new thing. This has actually only been done for about 30 to 40 years. Before that, there were a couple of states that held symbolic primary votes, but basically it was the convention that decided everything, and the delegates for the convention was picked by the party. It was the party bosses that picked the nominees. It was this way for the Republicans, and it was this way for the Democrats for the longest amount of time. Voting in the primaries is an anomaly, basically, when you take into perspective the amounts of years in which that has not been the case. Brandon, let's see how your mic is working now.
Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Okay, Brandon, you have pie charts. You have numbers to break down for us, and you have about 5 minutes. So
I do. I have lots of numbers.
So I have them, just so you know, Brandon, I set them up, they had 1, 2, and 3 in there, so that's the order I have them in.
That's fine.
And he goes silent.
Oh,
there you go.
Okay, sorry. The real problem is not necessarily the Electoral College itself. It's the winner-take-all system. And so that system allows for a lot of weird things to happen if you just happen to win the right combination of states or the right combination of voters. And so if you can see the first chart, that's the situation that could occur. You only actually need 11 states to win the presidency of the United States of America. So at the bottom, you see the 11 states you need exactly, the 11 most populous states: California, Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, and that would net you about 271 electoral votes. So that is the chart to the right. The chart to the left shows you that you only actually need 51% of the vote in each state to get that number. So it's possible to win the election with 11 states and about 30% of the popular vote. But that's not even how egregious. So, for example, these numbers were based off of the 2012 election. So that would mean you won the election with the 41 million votes to about 81 million votes. So if you go to the next chart, this is perhaps the most egregious way you can win the election of the United States of America. If you win the 39 least populous states because they are overrepresented, with just 51% of the vote, you can win 271 Electoral College votes with only 21.86% of the popular vote.
Seriously?
Yes, it's not. It's not likely, but since it's not proportional, it doesn't make a difference. In fact, theoretically, you could win with 0.001% because if only one person voted in these 11 states, you could still win. You still get all of the votes.
And so I guess presumably the idea is that the political leanings of these states I guess, are in at least in view of the parties, are so well entrenched that they could reliably count on how they were staggered in order to prevent such a lopsided outcome. But I think nowadays, I think that brings some interesting questions to the front, and we're almost out of time, so I don't mean to get an interrupt. So go on, finish your thing real quickly with the last slide.
Yeah, and this brings up this whole issue between safe states and swing states. So many states are yes, this last chart is showing a theoretical breakdown of what would happen if in one state a presidential candidate won 20% of the vote versus 49% voted versus a four-party split. In every case, it's the same thing. You still get a domination by one party of the entire state's electoral college vote, which has the side effect of making a multi-party system seem less viable, because any vote you give is viewed as being taken away from another candidate. So your second choice doesn't get that kind of power either.
But
it's a great American system.
okay, there was no fun at the end of that. I had really hoped that there was some sunshine, that there's going to be a yes, so we should vote for other parties than just the two traditional parties. But there really isn't, is there?
Well, I mean, that's the whole purpose of the winner-take-all system. So the winner-take-all system was established in order to give the two-party system, in order to give certain states more clout with a certain party. So no longer did states have to split the vote in one state. No longer did parties have to split the vote. So the states that adopted the system very early were given a lot more favors by the two political parties. So this was 1824. So then every other state had to adopt the system as well, or else be left behind, except for Maine and Nebraska, who don't have it. And the problem with that is, like as you mentioned earlier, it effectively disenfranchises the minority of the vote. So whoever does not vote with the plurality winner has their vote co-opted and their power co-opted by the majority winner, which has the side effect of, in safe states that it's not likely that your candidate will win anyway, of depressing the vote.
Okay, so, Brandon, I have to cut you off here.
Thank you very much for joining me.
I really want to have you back
Election
next week.
days come and go.
Do an even deeper dive on this, but Bernie is live right now, so the stream will just let it run and speak for itself.
They continue every day, every week, and every month in the fight to create a nation and world of social and economic justice. That's what the trade union movement is about. That's what the civil rights movement is about. That's what the women's movement is about. That's what the gay rights movement is about. That's what the environmental movement is about. And that's what this campaign has been about over the past year. That's what the political revolution is about, and that's why the political revolution must continue into the future. Real change never takes place from the top on down, or in the living rooms of wealthy campaign contributors. It always occurs from the bottom on up, when tens of millions of people say loudly and clearly, enough is enough, and they become engaged in the fight for justice. That's what the political revolution we helped start is all about. That's why the political revolution no money and very little name recognition. The media determined that we were a fringe campaign. Nobody thought we were going anywhere. Well, a lot has changed over a year. During this campaign, we won more than 12 million votes. We won 22 state primaries and caucuses. We came very close, within 2 points or less, in 5 more states. In other words, our vision for the future of this country is not some kind of fringe idea. It is not a radical idea. It is mainstream. It is what millions of Americans believe in and want to see happen. And something else extraordinarily important happened in this campaign that makes me very optimistic about the future of our country, something that, frankly, I had not anticipated. And that is that in virtually every state that we contested, we won the overwhelming majority of the votes of people 45 years of age or younger, sometimes, may I say, by huge numbers. These are the people who are determined to shape the future of our country. These are the people who are the future of our country. Together in this campaign, 1.5 million people came out to our rallies and town meetings in almost every state in the country. Together, hundreds of thousands of volunteers made 75 million phone calls, 75 million phone calls urging their fellow citizens into action. Together, our canvassers knocked on more than 5 million doors. Together, we hosted 74,000 meetings in every state and territory in this country. Together, 2.5 million people made over 8 million individual campaign contributions, more contributions at this point than any campaign in American history. Amazingly, the bulk of those contributions came from low-income and working people whose donations averaged $27 apiece. In an unprecedented way, we showed the world that we could run a strong national campaign without being dependent on the big money interests whose greed has done so much to damage our country. And let me give a special thanks to the financial support we received from students struggling to repay their college loans, from seniors and disabled vets on Social Security, from workers earning starvation wages, and even from people who were unemployed. In every single state that we contested, we took on virtually the entire political establishment: U.S. senators, members of Congress, governors, mayors, state legislators, and local party leaders. To those relatively few elected officials who had the courage to stand with us, I say thank you. Thank you, and we must continue working together into the future. This campaign has never been about any single candidate. It has always been about transforming America. It is about ending a campaign finance system which is corrupt and allows billionaires to buy elections. It is about ending the grotesque level of wealth and income inequality that we are experiencing, where almost all new wealth and income goes to the people on top, where the 20 wealthiest people own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans, half our population. It is about creating an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. It is about ending the disgrace of Native Americans who live on the Pine Ridge, South Dakota reservation, having a life expectancy lower than many third world countries. It is about ending the incredible despair that exists in many parts of this country, where, as a result of unemployment and low wages, suicide, drugs, and alcohol, millions of Americans are now dying in a historic way, in an ahistoric way, at a younger age than their parents. Think about it. People today by the millions dying at a lower age than their parents. It is about ending the disgrace of having the highest level of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth, and having public schools in inner cities that are totally failing our children, where kids now stand a greater chance of ending up in jail than ending up with a college degree. It is about ending the disgrace that millions of undocumented people in this country continue to live in fear and are exploited every day on their jobs because they have no legal rights. It is about ending the disgrace of tens of thousands of Americans dying every single year from preventable deaths because they either lack health insurance, have high deductibles, or cannot afford the outrageously high cost of the prescription drugs they need. Tens of thousands of Americans dying needlessly. It is about ending the disgrace of hundreds of thousands of bright young people unable to go to college because their families are poor or working class, while millions more struggle with suffocating levels of student debt. It is about ending the pain of a young single mother in Nevada, in tears, telling me that she doesn't know how she and her daughter can make it on the $10.45 an hour she earns. And the reality that today, millions of our fellow Americans are working at wages that are much, much too low. It is about ending the disgrace of a mother in Flint, Michigan, telling me what has happened to the intellectual development of her child as a result of excessive lead in the water in that city, of many thousands of homes in California and other communities where people are unable to drink the polluted water that comes out of their faucets. In America, in the year 2016, in a nation whose infrastructure is crumbling before our eyes. It is about ending the disgrace that too many veterans still sleep out on the streets, that homelessness is increasing, and that tens of millions of Americans, because of a lack of affordable housing, are now paying 40, 50% or more of their limited incomes to put a roof over their heads. It is about ending the disgrace that in a given year, corporations making billions of dollars in profit avoid paying a nickel in federal taxes because they stash their money in the Cayman Islands and in other tax havens. This campaign is also about defeating Donald Trump, the Republican candidate for president. After centuries of racism, sexism, and discrimination of all forms in our country, we do not need a major party candidate who makes bigotry the cornerstone of his campaign. We cannot have a president who insults Mexicans and Latinos, Muslims, women, and African Americans. We cannot have a president who, in the midst of so much income and wealth inequality, wants to give hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks to the very, very rich. We cannot have a president who, despite all of the scientific evidence, believes that climate change is a hoax. The major political task that together we face in the next 5 months is to make certain that Donald Trump is defeated and defeated badly. And I personally intend to begin my role in that process in a very short period of time. But defeating Donald Trump cannot be our only goal. We must continue our grassroots effort to create the America that we know we can become. And we must take that energy into the Democratic National Convention on July 25th in Philadelphia, where we will have more than 1,900 delegates. I recently had the opportunity to meet with Secretary Clinton and discuss some of the very important issues facing our country and the Democratic Party. It is no secret that Secretary Clinton and I have strong disagreements on some very, very important issues. It is also true that our views are quite close on others. I look forward in the coming weeks to continued discussion between the two campaigns to make certain that your voices are heard and that the Democratic Party passes the most progressive platform in its history, and that Democrats actually fight for that agenda. I also look forward to working with Secretary Clinton to transform the Democratic Party so that it becomes a party of working people and young people and not just wealthy campaign contributors. A party that has the guts to take on Wall Street, the pharmaceutical industry, the fossil fuel industry, and the other powerful special interests that dominate so much of our political and economic life. As I have said throughout this campaign, the Democratic Party must support raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour and create millions of jobs rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. We must ensure that women will no longer make 79 cents on the dollar compared to men, and that we fight for pay equity. We must also fight to make certain that women throughout this country have the right to control their own bodies. We must protect the right of our gay brothers and sisters to marriage equality in every state in America. As the recent tragedy in Orlando has made crystal clear, we must ban the sale and distribution of assault weapons, end the gun show loophole, and expand instant background checks. We must defeat the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, and make certain that bad trade deals do not get a vote in a lame duck session of Congress. The TPP must not come to the floor. We must resist all efforts to cut Social Security and, in fact, expand benefits for our senior citizens and disabled veterans. We must understand that the greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior on Wall Street has to end, that we need to pass a modern-day Glass-Steagall legislation, and that we need to break up the biggest financial institutions in this country, who not only remain too big to fail, but who prevent the kind of vigorous competition that a healthy financial system requires. We must aggressively combat climate change and transform our energy system, move to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, and impose a tax on carbon. It means that, further, we must protect our water supply by banning fracking. We must compete effectively in a global economy by making public colleges and universities tuition-free and substantially reduce student debt. We must join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all of our people as a right, not a privilege. We must end the disgrace of having more people in jail than any other country on earth and move toward real criminal justice reform at the federal, state, and local levels. We must pass comprehensive immigration reform and provide a path toward citizenship for 11 million undocumented people. We must take a hard look at the waste, cost overruns, and inefficiencies in every branch of government, including the Department of Defense. And we must make certain that our brave young men and women in the military are not thrown into perpetual warfare in the Middle East or other wars that we should not be fighting. But the political revolution means much more than fighting for our ideals at the Democratic National Convention and defeating Donald Trump. It means that at every level, we continue the fight to make our society a nation of economic, social, racial, and environmental justice. It means that we can no longer ignore the fact that, sadly, the current Democratic Party leadership has turned its back on dozens of states and has allowed right-wing politicians to win elections in some states with virtually no opposition, including some of the poorest states in our country. The Democratic Party needs a 50-state strategy. We may not win in every state tomorrow, but we will never win unless we recruit good candidates and develop organizations that compete effectively in the future. We must provide resources to those states which have so long been ignored. Most importantly, the Democratic Party needs leadership which is prepared to open its doors and welcome into its ranks working people and young people. That is the energy we need to transform the Democratic Party, take on the special interests, and transform our country. Here is a cold, hard fact that must be addressed. Since 2009, some 900 legislative seats have been lost to Republicans in state after state throughout this country. In fact, the Republican Party now controls 31 state legislatures and controls both the governor's mansions and state houses in 23 states. That is unacceptable. We need to start engaging at the local and state level in an unprecedented way. Hundreds of thousands of volunteers helped us make political history during this last year. These are people deeply concerned about the future of our country and about their own communities. Now we need many of them to start running for school boards, city councils, county commissions, state legislatures, and governorships. State and local governments make enormously important decisions, and we cannot allow right-wing Republicans to increasingly control them. I hope very much that many of you watching tonight are prepared to engage at that level. Please go to my website at berniesanders.com/win to learn more about how you can effectively run for office or get involved in politics at the local or state level. I have no doubt that with the energy and enthusiasm our campaign has shown, that we can win significant numbers of local and state elections if people are prepared to become involved. I also hope that people will give serious thought to running for statewide offices and the United States Congress. We need new blood in the political process, and you are that new blood. And when we talk about transforming America, it is not just about elections. Many of my Republican colleagues believe that government is the enemy, that we need to eviscerate and privatize virtually all aspects of government, whether it is Social Security, Medicare, the Veterans Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Postal Service, or public education. I strongly disagree. In a democratic, civilized society, government must play an enormously important role in protecting all of us and our planet. But in order for government to work efficiently and effectively, we need to attract great and dedicated people from all walks of life. We need people who are dedicated to public service and can provide the services we need in a high quality and efficient way. When we talk about a Medicare for all health care program and the need to make sure that all of our people have quality health care, it means that we need tens of thousands of new doctors and nurses and dentists and psychologists and other medical personnel who are prepared to practice in areas where people today lack access to that care. It means that we need hundreds of thousands of people to become child care workers and teachers so that our young people will get the best education available in the world. It means that as we combat climate change and transform our energy system away from fossil fuels, we need scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs who will help us make energy efficiency, solar energy, wind energy, geothermal, and other developing technologies as efficient and cost-effective as possible. It means that as we rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, we need millions of skilled and well-trained construction workers of all kinds. It means that when we talk about growing our economy and creating jobs, we need great business people who can produce and distribute the products and services that we need in a way that respects their employees and the environment. In other words, we need a new generation of people actively involved in public service who are prepared to provide the quality of life the American people deserve. Let me conclude by once again thanking everyone who has helped in this campaign in one way or another. We have begun the long and arduous process of transforming America, a fight that will continue tomorrow, next week, next year, and into the future. My hope is that when future historians look back and describe how our country moved forward into reversing the drift toward oligarchy, and how we move forward in creating a government which represents all of the people and not just the few, that they will note that to a significant degree, that effort began with the political revolution of 2016. Thank you all very much. Good night.
Yeah, so that was Bernie Sanders saying that the political revolution is by no means over, saying that he will work to defeat Donald Trump, but he has an agenda item list as long as his arm that he will not leave behind for the sole purpose of defeating Trump. That was Bernie Sanders, in at least my ears, saying that this is not by any means over. So there is a lot of commentaries in chat about let the Democratic Party die. There's a lot of commentary in chat about Hillary presidency will simply ignore Bernie Sanders. And you know what? That can actually happen if the people who support Bernie stand down, go back to the couch, throw up their arms and say, oh, this can't be done. I do not agree. If we stand up, if we keep standing up, if we show up in a big way in the general election to vote for Berniecrats everywhere, for school board, for everything, if we show up to the midterms like we didn't do for Obama in 10, and if we consistently show up during demonstrations, during protests, if we consistently say to the Hillary presidency, we are Berniecrats and we will not stand down. This is a lifetime commitment. You cannot ignore us. You cannot throw us to the side. Your re-election is not a lock. If we do that, if they realize, okay, we need Bernie at the midterms, then we will keep empowering Bernie. So there is a way forward here that involves the Hillary presidency. It's not ideal. By no means is it ideal. But if we stand down during the election, and I'm not saying hold your nose, go vote for Hillary. She has to win it on her own. I'm saying hold your nose, go to the polling place, and participate in the voting process to vote in a progressive Congress and Senate, locally and federally. Give the man something to work with. If you stand down, then you take out the last bullet he has in his gun, and then he will have zero influence. Then he will go to obscurity. Yeah.
sorts of possibilities. So don't get too wound up or bent out yet. Stay engaged, stay involved. We're running up and we're about to go over to Ben, so Nis will probably close us out here for us.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if we actually have sound, but you were
sorry.
completely.
Sorry. I must have turned down my mic so that I didn't override with Bernie. What I was saying is stay organized, stay engaged. Don't let whatever this happened. Don't let that discourage you. I've seen lots of messages. Don't let that.
I also don't have sound. Richard, just
okay.
We're cutting on to Ben.
So we will go.
Okay, so I'm not sure if we have sound or not. I just want to say thank you for all of you for joining us, and thank you for Benjamin Dixon for hosting our show on his channel. And I want to say thank you to Brandon and Richard for helping doing the show, not helping, for creating the show, and for David for doing his amazing job, and to Richard for being the big ass, badass octopus that he is, making the show happen.